Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefuehl and welcome to Levi in the north of Finland. We are here because Porsche are attempting a double fister. They are trying to convince us that electric cars can do things that people have previously assumed simply aren't possible. In this case, anyone who owns any type of camera equipment and has ever tried filming around about the Arctic Circle knows that batteries do not like to be cold. So, what better place could we come to find out how Porsche's first fully electric car will perform in the cold? Let's take a closer look and find out. When the Taycan first launched, it was available as the Taycan Turbo or the Taycan Turbo S. If you had the chance to watch our full review, that was the one we got the chance to drive. Now it's been joined in the lineup by the Taycan 4S. That is designed to be the most affordable, well, okay, I can hear you chuckle a little bit, and also most economical model within the lineup. So it has a smaller battery, a little bit less power, a little bit less acceleration, but of course it's still a Porsche, so it's still going to want to perform. So what are the key differences? Well, I think if you looked at the original design and you really liked it as we did, then you'll be happy to know that aesthetically, it's almost impossible to tell the difference from the cars purely by looking at them. The design stays the same. Now, if you're not familiar with the Taycan and its initial offering, then we're going to take a closer look and show you what some of those features are. The front is very distinctive, but for us, what I particularly liked is how much they managed to embrace traditional Porsche design with new elements that just tell you it's something a little special, a little different. The most noticeable features about the front are now standardly LEDs, whatever you do, but of course full matrix are available. They are going to cost you more. I particularly like these air intakes within the design of the front grille. That's because thermal management for this car is of course key. So nothing on here is for aesthetic purpose only. Everything is to help the car get the most out of its performance that's possible. So when you put that all together, what you're looking at is a front that's both angular and round. And I think it's a really nice traditional mix with modern aesthetic design. What do you think? 4 meters 96 in length or 195 inches. Round at the side and we start getting our first impressions of differences. Now the Taycan can come with either 19, 20 or 21 inch wheels. Standardly, the 4S will come with 19, the Turbo with 20, and of course the Turbo S with the largest 21. Here we have 20 inch wheels, and that's only because these special winter tires that it's fitted with are currently only available as 20 inch. But by the time the car launches early next year, you will also be able to get those in the 19 inch. Why is 19 inch important? Well, they are the most efficient of the wheels on offer. So if you're looking to get the best performance in terms of range from your battery, that's the size to go with. These rims are aero sports rims. Again, that means that they are maximized for efficiency in drive. So if you want to get the absolute best out of your battery, this is going to be the way for you to go. As we look slightly further along the sweep of the car, again, there is nothing here particularly to draw your attention from the standard Taycan experience. You have charging points on both sides of the car, but only one is available to use for DC. To open and access them, it's a very simple swipe along here. As you can see, because of the temperature, I have heavily gloved hands, and because of that, I can't show you this right now, but we will show you that a little bit later on. What I can show you right now, because it's in its prominent position, are these door handles. Now, if you're thinking they look a little bit familiar, you'd be right. They are a very similar, if not almost identical design to the new 911 door handles. Regular viewers might be aware that we weren't massively impressed with the way that they felt. I can tell you that they have been updated and changed for the Taycan. They feel a lot more solid and purposeful on this car than they do on the 911. So, much more pleasing once you actually get to touching them. Look at this lovely sweep of the roofline combined with this large side flank of the wheel arch flares. A really nice aesthetic piece of design, again to evoke not only traditional Porsche design, but also the new modern design aesthetic that this car offers. So for me, that is a complete hit, especially here in the snow. I think it just looks amazing. But tell me, what do you think? Round at the back, and the snow is helping us to see some of those accents. Of course, the lack of a need to have any room made for exhausts offers you visually a really interesting opportunity to change the way you approach the rear of the design of this vehicle. Nothing here has gone crazy, but I like the way that the accents really pulls your eye to these horizontal lines. As you can see, this full lighting strip that runs the whole length of the boot and into the sides really helps to compress the massive bulk of the rear of this car. So it still looks svelte, stylish, and very dynamic. Styling here is really minimalistic. I think that this car wants to do all of its talking in the way that it drives. But that said, I'm always a big fan of rear car design, particularly because it's a challenge to pull off. And when you're talking about larger rear wheel arches, which sports cars always feature, it's very difficult to get the balance right between power and still stylishness. And I think this one carries it off particularly nicely. This car is going to make me do something that I didn't think I was going to be prepared to, and that's take my glove off. So these are the charging points. There are identical looking charging points on both sides of the car. You access them by swiping underneath this sensor here. But only one is DC, and that is on the passenger side of the vehicle. This is AC only, but it does mean when you get into your garage at home, irrespective of where you have a charge point fitted, you should be able to easily access that point. So, as you can see, opens and shuts pretty effortlessly. We came around to the passenger side of the car just to show you the DC charging point. Now, some of you might well be wondering, because of the climate that we're filming in, what happens if this door becomes shut? Well, brilliantly, there is a mechanism by which the cover will vibrate very slightly to break the ice free to make sure you can always enter it. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, we're not frozen today, so I can't actually show you that working. But it does mean that a solution has been provided just in case you happen to live in Finland. So that's the exterior of the vehicle, but how does it look once you actually get into it? Well, as I already mentioned, the first points to mention are the door handles. If you have had the experience of the new 911, I think you're going to be really pleasantly surprised by how much more solid these feel in your hand. They still look very nice sculpturally, and of course they sit flush with the panel in order to aid with the aerodynamic performance of the car. As you open up the door, you can see that we have frameless windows. Look very stylish and nice indeed. Nice bit of angularity on the corner, and we get our first glance of the interior styling. Well, we are very happy to announce that Porsche have, for the first time ever, offered a fully vegan interior for one of their sports cars. So that means if you're not a fan of leather, you can now get a pretty much guilt-free Porsche. But, of course, that's not everybody's taste. And if you want to go leather still, don't worry, they have you covered. There is a partial leather interior as well. But us being Autogefuehl, of course, we've gone full vegan, and you can get a good look at that here. So there are lots of different options that you can go with. Lots of different styling options. As you can see, this is a very conservative layout. I like that feature. To be honest, when you sit in one of these cars, you really just want to be focused completely on the drive, and that's what the car delivers. But that said, there is plenty enough in the way of storage, and it's all really nicely integrated into the design. Now, let's take a look at that seat. There are 8 different adjustments you can make to this driving position. So however you are suited, you should be able to get your geometry exactly right for it. They're really comfortable. We've put some significant miles down on them, and I have to tell you, they're really good at handling people with different body shapes. I'm a little bit larger maybe than some other people, so you would think sports cars might not necessarily be the most comfortable place for me to sit, but I can tell you they're really, really good at being able to be adjusted to exactly what suits you. As you can see, the Taycan 4S plate on the door greets you as you come in and lets you know which model you're driving. It all looks pretty good, but how does it feel once you sit in it? Let's find out. Well, if it looked like it wasn't the most elegant thing for me to get into this car, please remember I have particularly short legs, and that means that the seat is very far forwards. It's actually very easy to get in and out of. I'm 5'10" or 178 centimeters, and as you can see, I have a good 2 inches of space above my head. Because of those short legs and long torso, you can compare me at around about 6'1", somewhat unbelievable but true in terms of how I look in this car. The first thing you notice when you sit here is the really bold new design statement that's made by the Taycan. Out with the analog, in with the digital. But what's really nice about what's happened here is that there's nothing here to scare people who like the traditional look and feel of a Porsche. It's just like a Porsche a bit from the future. And I think it works really well. Let's take a closer look. First thing to talk about in the interior is this new steering wheel. Now, for regular viewers who've already seen my full-length review of the Taycan, Thomas's feedback was, okay, Brian, you like the steering wheel. We get it. No need to spend 15 minutes talking about it, so I won't go on about it too much. I only want to mention, as you can see, I do have small hands, so that may be a reason why I like this so very much. So please test it for yourself. If you have large hands, I really would be interested to hear how you find it. But for me, the steering wheel is more or less perfect. This covering feels absolutely fabulous, especially when you're driving the car in a sporty way. The amount of grip it provides and the feeling that you get underneath your hand is absolutely superb. The control layout, whilst minimalistic, is entirely functional. The drive mode button in particular is just so effortless. Switching between modes while you're driving, you can do without a thought and certainly without needing to look at it. But I also like the aesthetic appeal of the wheel itself. Porsche are so enthusiastic about getting their design to look exactly the way that they want it, that they have lots of Easter eggs to find throughout the car. This is one in particular. I have to tell you, I didn't know about this until Thomas Blaketsky told me about it. If you want the heated steering wheel, this is where the button is located, right behind the midpoint here. That way it doesn't interfere in any way with the design of the aesthetic appeal of the wheel, but it's still instantly and easily accessible when you want it. And that attention to detail is right throughout the cockpit. Now, if I can get Jonas to switch on the car, you will get your first look at the brand new digital display. Well, that is quite a piece of real estate, 16.8 inches across. The particular design feature that Porsche are proud of here is that, as you'll notice, there is no cowl surrounding it for light. The reason for that is that the engineers have put a huge amount of work and effort into making the display non-reflective. Now, although it's not very evident today, we have tested this car extensively in bright sunlight, and I can tell you that it's astonishing how well it works. So the display really is as good as it looks on camera. Now, there are a couple of minor quibbles. As I'm sure you'll be aware from watching Jonas's camera work, this steering wheel does obscure part of the display while you're driving. But Porsche have put attention to making sure that the bits that it displays are not prime to your experience of the car. You just don't care that they're being a bit obscured while you're driving. But the way that it presents visually is so stunning, it works so well. To be honest, you really don't care. Now, moving across slightly, what you can see is a 10.9-inch touchscreen that complements the driver's display. Now, I really am a huge fan of this car. The only really minor quibble I would have, regular viewers will know I still like analog buttons and switches for things that you consistently access, like heating and cooling. But I'm prepared to give this one car a let on this, and the reason is that this is supposed to be a very much future-based car, and because of that, everything has to be clean, uncluttered, and digital. So, If I want to access the heating and cooling, as you can see, that's done digitally here. Now, if you have a look a little lower on the camera, this is a full haptic feedback trackpad. So your ability to interact with the system, of course, improves all the time you use it. Let me just show you that screen. If I pop between that and standard display, you can see just how smoothly that works. But there are a couple of quirks. Now, if you actually want to make adjustments to the heating and cooling in the car, you have to do that through the main display here. And I ask you, if you imagine driving this car to the maximum, can you really imagine pushing the menu button here, pushing the individual control here, and changing where the wind is blowing like this? I mean, stylistically, it looks absolutely incredible. But from a practical perspective, well, I just have a feeling if you're stuck with the wind blowing in your face, you'll be too busy driving to worry much about how you go about changing it. Well, that said, there is one nice feature here which I want to draw your attention to. Now, a lot of other reviewers are a little bit mystified by this. I am not one of them. Here, if you can see, is an optional secondary full-size passenger display. And that means that your passenger can look at all of the systems, and I stress nothing that impacts on the drive, through their own display without using yours, the driver display. I think that's a really great feature. I don't know about you, but when I'm driving and my passenger is enthusiastic to start seeing what my system can do by changing some of the settings and looking at it, it drives me a little bit nuts. So I really like giving the passenger that opportunity to feel included in the driving experience with their full set without interfering with mine. Now, a lot of reviewers have said, come on, look, is there really such a difference between poking your finger here and poking your finger here? Well, my answer would be, actually there is, because if I'm looking at the navigation here, I really don't want my passenger deciding what they want to do with the music while I'm trying to pay attention to the navigation. A small point, I think an important one. So overall, the design language is unbelievably clean and precise. Everything looks incredibly high-tech and futuristic. It all works really, really well. But the compromise is, when you want to make changes to the system, you are definitely going to feel like you need a co-pilot to do it for you. Interestingly for Porsche, they've decided to put the gear selector here rather than the more familiar central console placing. That might well be because, again, the design aesthetic is to keep this as clean and uncluttered as possible. So you do have cup holders and they are adaptive for different sizes, but as you can see, it's just kept so simple and uncluttered. I really appreciate that styling. There is a central console for storage. And what I really like about the design here is that the phone has been thought of. There's inductive charging built into the side of the compartment, and as you can see, a really great clip to hold your phone in place to make sure it's not rattling around while you're having all that fun driving. Now, being an electric car, you'd expect the Taycan to come with all sorts of charging options, and it does. So if you haven't yet got a phone that comes with inductive charging, there are 2 USB charge points right here. But wait, we're still not done. There's also a 12-volt charge point that should take care of anything else you need to charge up. Well, the front's comfortable and spacious, but how about the back? It is a sports car, so can you realistically sit in the rear of it? Well, at only 7 centimeters shorter than a Panamera, you would expect there to be a little bit of room back here. And as you can see, you're not disappointed. Now, I think it's really important to point out the driver's seat in front of me is set for me. And as I said, I do have rather diminutive lower proportions. So this is not a realistic example. However, if I move across to the other side, as you can see here where I'm sat behind Jonas's seat, he is over 6 feet in height, so this really is a fair representation of the rear seat knee room. Now, a really nice design feature of this seat, as you can see, sculpturally, it's been carved out to make additional space for the rear passenger's knees. And that means you actually have a fair bit more room back here than you might expect. Seats are very comfortable, and of course, that high state of technology continues through into the back. So I have my own touchscreen display down here with the same controls, and whilst I said they may not be the most practical thing in the world for the driver to use, I can guarantee your children are going to have hours of fun deciding whereabouts on your head that they want the wind to be blowing at any given time. Well, of course they'll get bored of that pretty quickly, but it is nice to see that the rear seat passengers have been included in this digital future. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that there aren't any charge points back here, but you can, of course, run discrete cables from the charge point in the central console. Once you're back here, well, I think it's made abundantly clear that this really is a two people in the rear proposition. So the central area here has a nice non-slip compartment that's really just for storage and making your rear seat passengers feel more comfortable. If you happen to find yourself out in Finland and needing to access the rear of your car, then this whole midsection folds down, allowing you access through to the boot. But for the rest of the time, two nicely integrated cup holders will make you feel more than at home when you're sitting back here. So honestly, I can tell you that yes, I'm a little bit squished in the head department, but actually nothing to make the journey feel that much of an inconvenience. So I would be perfectly happy sitting back here for a decent length bit of travel. And for the rear of a sports car, I think you've got to be happy with that. Well, being an electric car, you have to make room for the cables, which means that they have to have somewhere to live. And I can tell you that what you're looking at is 370 litres of load space. And, again, a nice nod to charging, a 12-volt charge point back here, which means if you're taking the car somewhere camping or something like that, you actually have a really good range of different power options while you're there. And look, a little discreet additional storage area underneath here to either take your charge cables or a couple of little extra bits of clutter, just making the most room available to you that's possible. The seats fold down in a 60/40 configuration. I'm just going to go through and show you what that looks like. And again, to me, impressively for a sports car, well, that's the price of picking the one that Jonas was sitting in front of. Let's use the other seat so I can show you. So, impressively for a sports car, they actually fold almost completely flat, which is super handy because although I find it astonishing to imagine that anyone would have this as their only car, if you do, and you still need to go to IKEA from time to time, amazingly, you will be able to fit your purchases in this car. So, you really do have to take your hats off to that one. But wait, we're not all done with the storage. I know it's an old trick, but I still get excited when I see this. This is the frunk, and what you're looking at is an additional 80 litres. Why do I find this so exciting? Because my wife doesn't know that it's there, and she never will. For those of you who haven't been lucky enough to come to the Porsche driving experience in Levi, Finland, well, I should explain. Ordinarily, you have lots of test tracks and the cars are specially set up. Now, Porsche really wanted us to understand what the 4S can deliver as standard. So we have winter tires, not studded tires. And because of that, we've borrowed a friendly Porsche driver to take us out and show us exactly what the car can deliver. And this is important, safely. So we've been joined by Andreas Fischer. Andreas, what exactly do you do for Porsche?
So I work for Porsche many years, and I start my career as instructor in a safety training center in Germany, and then it's coming a couple of years before Porsche to the center, and means if you want you can work for us, and this is more to 8 years. And now we are here, and for Porsche we make all the jobs for press events like this, or driving programs for the winter and the summer. Porsche track experience, winter experience, and also like this.
And now we're going to do something that we definitely don't recommend that you do, but only to show you exactly how well those traction systems can work with only winter tires on the snow and ice. So, launch control, can we do it?
Yeah.
Let's go.
3, 2, 1.
Wow. You've got to be pretty impressed with that. That's 0 to 100 in 4 seconds, probably a little longer because obviously we have a lot less traction right now. But you can see how good of a job the car did of keeping us on a straight line. Actually, that's not entirely fair to Andreas. I should say how good of a job the car and Andreas did keeping us on a straight line and headed where we were supposed to be going. But it really is impressive just quite what a job those winter tyres do of providing you with traction where you simply think there wouldn't be any.
But with normal winter tires, the tire have a lot to do to find the grip back when you have this power on every tire, and you give with the launch control mode the car the information we want to go forward from now to now. And this is, yeah, with the normal winter tire, it's what you can order every day. It's unbelievable. Really, it's unbelievable.
Now in this car we only have the 20 inches because at the moment there is only the winter tyre available on the 20-inch wheel. But by the time the car comes to market, you should be able to get the winter tyres as well on the 19-inch, which comes standard on this car. So if you want maximum efficiency, but you still want to have some fun driving in snow and ice, don't worry, you should be able to do it. This is the slalom track. So now we're going to see just how good that traction handling is.
So you use maximum 90 degrees steering angle to pass these sticks, but then you can feel step by step the car start to slide. PSM is work. If you turn in maximum half steering angle 180 degrees, your front tire give you feedback, oh, no more grip. This is in normal drive mode, important. Porsche said we want to have on the limit when you drive normal, maybe earlier the understeering situation. If you turn to the sport mode, we'll do it now, then it's coming more a neutral drive feeling, the balance. So, but you have in all drive modes, normal, sport, sport plus, and full activated PSM. It's working every time. So
you can feel that really having the impact on the drive. And if you find it difficult getting a sense of exactly what this course is like, the best description I can give it is if you imagine an ice rink with a light dusting of snow, that's more or less what we're driving on right now with only winter tires and no studs. So you can imagine finding traction in this environment is more than a little bit of a challenge.
This is more to a challenge with winter tires. Why you have on the snow a bit more grip, on the ice less grip, and with the spike tires it's completely different. If you have more ice, you have more grip. If you have more snow, you have less grip. This is for your head not easy to understand why it doesn't go like this or like that. So if you turn too much, maybe like this, then you get so much move in the car. I stay now full on the throttle, full, unlock, and the car say no. PSM is an unstable situation, I help. If you press the button PSM one time, then PSM Sport is activated, is working, but later. And you can play a bit more. So now stay full on the throttle, turn a bit back, car start to slide, and all-wheel drive. If you turn in, the power goes more in the rear. If you turn back, the power goes more in front. The same like the PTM from a normal petrol car. And the feeling is exactly like the same.
You really don't have a sense of quite how significant the technology is in controlling the way that additional weight relates to the way the car handles. It's actually quite incredible to sit here. If you understand everything about car design standardly is about making them lighter. This car, there's only so much you can achieve with the batteries that it holds, but it's extraordinary the amount of traction and control you're still able to have over the drive.
Right, this car is heavier to what you can feel.
Yes, that's the key.
That's the key. That's most the problem. If you turn in, you get the feedback. The car is maybe 3.5 meters long, not more. Why you have a rear axle steering?
So come on, Andreas. Show us what this car can deliver.
Okay, then.
When you're really showing off your driving skill and the car's ability. We're going around the slalom.
And we go PSM really off. We go on this Sport Plus mode. Suspension we go in soft. And then you can play with the car.
That's great. Because of that loss of traction.
Yeah,
it's a lot more comfortable though to drive around as a passenger than it is standardly on a racetrack. It's very nice. Now, amongst the driving instructors, do you guys ever come out here and have competitions to see who can make the fastest lap time?
Every year we have this competition, and every year our supervisors say, guys, be careful when you stuck first time, then you must order in the evening on the bar for all the guys beer. This is the biggest problem. And you have ever ended up having to pay the whole bill for everyone? Yeah, but then you have not just one beer, that's the whole evening. Oh, and the mechanics the same. Mechanics are coming, guys, we prepare every day the cars for you, and now we are included, or okay, come on. That's maybe a good way if you have a car like this and you want to lend it to your friend. Maybe that's a good way of getting them to bring it back in the condition that you lent it to them in. Right. Yeah, sure, you can have some fun, but if anything happens, a lot of fun. You're paying the beers for everyone for 1 week. So you told me earlier on that the impressive thing about the traction here is that it's almost delivering some similar characteristics to some other cars that maybe have studded tires. It's really interesting to see the way that the interaction between the drive and the traction works. Now here, of course, in order to have the most fun, you turn off the systems so they're not stopping you from doing what you want to do. We go backwards in a corner and forward out of a corner. Awesome. You very quickly get a sense of exactly why it is you want those systems when you're driving on the road. When you drive on the road, go normal drive mode, PSM stay on, and then you have all the safety parts from the car, and then you are every time are safe on the way. And Porsche said all the years we prepare and we produce sports car with this sports car DNA, and you can go with this car for every day to your job, to your office, to the shop, to maybe to the holiday, and you can go on the track and you can have fun. And you're still seeing how good of a job they've done with these winter tires, because the fact is, with everything switched off, again, I keep coming back to the weight of this car. It's surprising how much control you can still get from the drive on ice with really none of that electronics helping you, so that it is all the work of the skill of the driver, but also those winter tires are managing to find traction. I really can't recommend enough, if you live anywhere that experiences snow in the winter, buy the winter tires for those drives. It makes such a difference. You can always switch them out again, of course, but it really is truly extraordinary. If you haven't experienced the difference between winter tires specifically and standard tires, once you have some snow, it's unbelievable, especially if you only have a front-wheel drive car, as I do. It's like nothing else. It's like changing a front-wheel drive car to an all-wheel drive car. It really is amazing. Okay, so slaloms we're good for. What's next? So maybe now we can go in the circle, the endless corner. We say then you get the customer a feeling when is coming the limit, when is starting the sliding, is it starting more in front or on the rear axle. Yeah, and then we give all the customers and small feedback what you have to do to come back in the stable before we say now we start with the stable unstable. It's more the drifting part. Yes, and this is the Swedish flick thing, right? We need to make the car unstable before we can find the point at which we can control the slide. Right. So this must be a harder trick to play in this car because, of course, all of the weight with the centrifugal force is pushing us to go out even harder and further. Combine that with the fact that we don't have any spikes on the car, I don't know, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of a speed you can achieve on a drift here. With or without drift? What we want to start? Normal drive. Let's start. Yeah, let's start standard, and then let's move into standard. We're the same what we do with the customer. Okay. Excellent. We turn in and driving is stable. The same radius. So this is a Jonas rating. I would say probably of a 2 for comfort. Right. Does that sound good? 1 is the best. 2 is coming down. No, so very comfortable. He's got a lot of space back there. It's actually pretty good. Here we go. So PSM is on. Radius goes bigger. We have a bit a bit understeering in the normal mode. This is what Porsche said. You want to have a more and safe part when you drive normal. Understeer, reduce the pressure on the throttle, and then you find a way back. If you turn too much, like this, then the PSM is working, brake different tires, and you come more to the inside.
That's fantastic.
So if we do exactly the same, PSM on in the Sport Plus mode, we get a bit more an oversteer situation. Not a really hard oversteering, it's just for you to get the feedback if you turn, the car turn. You open with the steering just a bit, the car is coming back on the right direction. You can control the power more on the front or on the rear about the steering wheel. The same what you have on an all-wheel drive car and a petrol car, Panamera, 911, and so on, so on, so on. Exactly the same feeling you get, the feedback you get, and you have to do exactly the same.
So we're starting driving with everything still switched on to show just how those safety features are helping you interact in regular, real-world conditions.
Right, and then we reduce the system. We go on PSM sport mode, it's working, but later. Same what we do on the circuit, or what we did in the slalom. Then you can feel, you can play a bit more, but you must do a bit more to get the car back in the right direction. But behind, the system is working every time. So you turn back, you come back in the right direction. So and at the end, we say, okay, if you have a good feeling, and every time you know what you have to do, then we switch it completely off. And then we can play. .80 degrees, drift angle.
That's great. Looking for traction, looking for traction. I know it probably doesn't need saying, but this is important only to do this in a specifically prepared area.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for this is that at the moment, all of this environment has a very consistent response rate to it. If you were to try doing this in what you assume is a frozen car park from a supermarket, late at night, no one else there, the two biggest things that can kill your car, first of all, are bollards covered with snow you can't see. Trust me, they don't like that on the underside of the car. And the second thing is, it's all very well and good looking for traction, but what happens if your car suddenly finds some can be a bit of a shock.
But you can do this. You couldn't do this one time. But if you make a mistake and you must call your wife and explain
or
why
husband.
you come a bit later, or husband, or you come a bit later at home, what was the problem? Never time say it was the car. It's every time the problem between the steering wheel and the backrest.
Yeah, I suspect that this is true. I think it's a really good way to get an excellent understanding of quite how sophisticated the technology is. Because if you see the car behaving perfectly naturally when you apply power to the wheels without that control, the difference is incredible. And it makes you wonder how it's even possible to drive it as we were before with everything switched on. It really is astonishing. But of course, you have the most fun if you're here, and then you can drive it without the system switched on and really make the most of it.
Right, but for this, if you do that, you must have a lot of space to can play, to make maybe a mistake, to can feel when is coming the limit, and so on, so on, so on. Therefore, we say, if you want to do that, come to Finland. We have all what you need.
Well, Andreas, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for showing us just what the Taycan can do. It really is quite something to experience. So In case this all seems a bit like an advert to you, I promise you it isn't. I have driven these courses and I can tell you it is every bit as much fun as you think it looks. Now, whether or not you can justify the expense, clearly that's up to you. But I can tell you, if you want to have an experience of how it should feel to drive on snow and ice, the Porsche driving experience here in Finland is about the best way you're going to be able to try it. That said, it's always important to remember this is a specifically purpose-built course. Please don't drive like this on the roads, or you're not going to be finding that it's as much fun as it looks. Andreas, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Please, it was a pleasure.
So what exactly are we doing in Finland? Well, there are two key questions that we're here to answer. Firstly, if you haven't seen our full-length review of the Taycan Turbo S, then you may not be familiar with exactly what this car is capable of. So the first of those important questions, is the 4S capable of delivering enough of that experience to justify it still carrying the Taycan label? Secondly, at a significantly reduced price, but still not inconsiderable, of €105,000 retail, that gives you a lot of choice amongst Porsches. So is this really one that you want to seriously consider going for? And the second point, we all know that lithium-ion batteries do not like cold weather. So how does the car perform once you get it in a very inhospitable cold environment? Well, Finland is certainly a good place to come and test that out. But I have to tell you, Porsche have figured out a little way of cheating. This car is fitted with the optional, and I stress optional, heat pump. What that does is it heats the battery to 28 degrees centigrade while and before and during its charging. Now, the advantage to that is that you don't experience any of the traditional problems that you would with, say, a camera battery, or if you've ever brought a phone into a space like this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But of course, that does mean that you need to more or less permanently leave this thing plugged in. Now, I've spoken to Porsche about that, and they do tell me that if you live in these conditions, that's a very normal behavior anyway. Most cars have preheaters. So if you keep the car plugged in, then in principle, and I've seen the data on it, the battery shouldn't experience any significant loss in performance. Now, here's the first benefit of going with the 4S. That means that you will still have the best range of any of the Taycans on offer. There are a couple of obvious reasons for that. The one is the less performance, and the second is that if you go with the 19-inch wheels, they're much more efficient in terms of road use. So what does less performance actually mean? Well, the Turbo S will deliver an ear-splitting speed of 2.8 seconds for a 100-mile-an-hour push. This car does it in 4. Well, that sounds like a bit of a compromise, but I have to tell you, having experienced it firsthand, and we're going to show you what it feels like in just a moment, it's actually surprising how well it works. So that's the first thing. They're just letting us out now. We're going out onto the main streets. Of course, we have the test track behind us, but important for us is to be able to show you how this car behaves out in its real world environment. So there's a lot of snow and ice out here today, as you can probably see. It is, after all, northern Finland. But we have all-wheel drive that gives us a lot of grip and control. So 4 seconds 0 to 100 speed, extended range, and according to Porsche at least, with an optional heat pump, no compromise in terms of the length of distance you're able to travel with this car. Now, if you are a big data person and you just love hearing all of the numbers behind these cars, don't worry. We are going to have a chat to an expert in a little bit to make sure that we have all of the facts and figures available to you. But for now, it's all about the drive. Well, the first criticism you're ever going to hear about electric cars is, I just don't know if I'm ready to give up on that noise. You do have an electronically generated noise to listen to while you drive the Taycan, and for what it's worth, I think they've got it just right. It really strikes the balance nicely between giving you a sense that you are in something that's moving, giving you a sense that you're in something very modern that you haven't experienced before, but giving you enough feedback, which is so important on an oral level, that you understand exactly what is happening with the car, albeit that clearly that is completely synthesized and not natural at all. It just works. A huge amount of time and attention has been put into making sure that all of the feedback that comes through the steering and the brakes feel incredibly natural and exactly as you expect it to. That really makes driving this car a fun thing. But of course, what you all really want to know is, what happens when you put your foot down? Well, we have test tracks to show you just what can be achieved. But for now, that gives you a little taste of the acceleration. So 4 seconds, no slouch. And I have to tell you, I really like the way that the power is delivered here. It doesn't make you feel compromised, and it still gives you a rush in the same way that the Turbo S absolutely blows your mind. So if you're a bit of a speed freak, there's still lots here to get happy about. Don't forget, we have less torque in this car than the Turbo S, by a considerable amount, but still more than enough. What's really exciting in this car is the way that the handling delivers. That falls into two categories. Half are Porsche's onboard electronics, and they do a superb job of making the drive seem effortless. I can't stress enough, what we're driving on right now is pure ice, and these are not studded tires. These are only Porsche's winter tires, but they are very happy with them. And once you start driving on snow and ice, you can see why. Yeah, you can't drive like a crazy person, a little bit like you can on studs. But you know what? The amount of traction that you get in conjunction with that driving technology is really very impressive. It just gives you that extra bit of security, knowing that when you're throwing the car around, and of course, most people aren't driving in these conditions every day, the car is going to take care of you. When you put that in conjunction with the power that the car offers, it makes for a really very satisfying drive indeed. So driving position, well, of course the 4S offers you almost exactly the same experience from a driving point of view that the Turbo S does. Really, if I put you in both cars, I would challenge you to tell me that there was any difference that you would notice between the experience of both beyond the power. The control, the poise is exactly the same, the driving position, the seat, everything is really nice here. Visibility is actually pretty good. Yes, that B-pillar is big, and depending on where your seat comes, it's either more or less of a challenge to make sure that you have good all-round visibility, but it's very pleasantly surprising how much of a rear view you still get, despite the fact that you have that letterbox to the rear to look through. As far as the responsiveness of the controls themselves, being completely honest, I would have to say that my mind has been blown by this car. It's absolutely extraordinary how much of a Porsche driving experience you get from this car. Now, you might think that that's obvious and goes without saying. You know, they're not going to release a car at this price point without it being really very pleasing to drive. But outside of the noise, you really could be forgiven for mistaking this driving experience for an internal combustion engine. If you think I'm making that up, ask to any one of the professional drivers, racing or otherwise, who've taken this car out. They all think it's fantastic. Really, you just have to try it to believe it. Steering wheel is absolutely superb. Of course, the PDK is great and works so nicely with the electric motors to deliver that power. I would say the most surprising thing about the 4S is just how much smiling it allows you to do. I really thought that I'd be driving this car and thinking, it's great, but it's not the Turbo S. Well, you know what? I think it's actually really an awful lot of car for not nearly as much money. Speaking of torque, the actual numbers themselves, the Turbo S gives you 1,050 Newton meters of torque. This car, the 4S, gives you 650. What's particularly interesting is that if you opt for the larger of the two battery options, it won't change the numbers of this car at all. And the reason that's impressive is specifically because, of course, it changes the weight. So there's a little bit of tinkering happening there to achieve that. Hopefully we can find out a little bit more later on with the expert. But you do gain in terms of range. This car capable of delivering about 463 kilometers of range. Now, okay, I'm sure the optional heat pump makes a significant step towards helping you maintain that figure. And please bear in mind that all distance figures on electric cars are complicated to assess. That doesn't mean that there's any degree of trying to mislead customers. The new standard of WLTP is much more reliable, but ultimately it does depend very significantly on how you're using the vehicle. Now today, for example, we have an awful lot of static with this car. We've sat around while we're shooting this car from inside and outside. Unlike a petrol car, because it's electric, every single minute that you're doing anything with it at all, that power is draining. So that usage figure, of course, is based upon what happens if you are using it constantly. Comfort being provided to us right now is by air suspension, and it performs really nicely indeed. This road is very pitted, snow and ice, but there's lots of holes in it. So although you might be picking up a fair amount of cabin noise, I can tell you that it's actually very quiet in here compared to the road that we're driving on and what you might expect. So the driving experience overall is very pleasurable, very comfortable and very enjoyable. One of the nicest features about this car is it's a beast when you want it to be, but when you just want to have a nice, beautiful drive through the woods, well, I have to tell you, somewhat disappointingly, the speed limit here is 60. That then is, of course, what we're driving. It feels just as nice to drive in at the lower speeds as it does when you really get to put your foot down. And for a car like this, I think that's actually a pretty great achievement. So, for example, the system is currently telling us that the battery holds 85% of its charge. And according to the system, that's telling us that gives us a 229 kilometer range. Well, obviously, I'm not great with mental maths, but that's quite a long way off from the quoted figure of 463, although that is the peak number, which is, again, where the differences get a little complicated. But don't forget, we are using heating quite extensively because of outside, and we're doing a lot of stop starting. That also is changing our efficiency. But one of the very nicest features about the Taycan is the fact that 90% of its braking is recuperative. Because of that, they have to coat the brakes with a special coating to make sure they don't rust through lack of use. I don't know that that's a significant problem when you're driving on ice, but it is quite a significant achievement, and it massively helps get that range up as far as it will possibly go. So at the moment, we are reporting a consumption of 24 kilowatt hours for every 100 kilometers driven. So I think the numbers, and if you want to, you can sit down and work them all out, pencil on paper, broadly speaking, do stack up. But please remember, this is a new technology, and because of that, while the governments are figuring out the best way to accurately reflect what exact consumption and mileage these cars will do, the best thing you can do if you're thinking about buying an electric car is see if you can get one for the weekend, use it exactly the way you plan on using it, look at its realistic range as you plan on using the car, and ask yourself if that works for you. For my money, I would argue that if you're planning on getting a Taycan and your expected need to drive is anywhere under 300 kilometers standard between charges, you will be absolutely fine. We've now put a lot of miles on this car, and although I definitely think it would be a stretch to describe accurately the way the maximum consumption figures are quoted, it would be quite hard to achieve those without a test track. They're not a million miles away from what realistic world usage can provide you. So, a lot of words, which is to say, I would look at any electric car, look at the total quoted WLTP number, knock off about 25% of that, and that should give you a pretty decent real world number. If you have a different experience of that, I'd love to hear from you. Meanwhile, I think all of this adds up to a really fantastic experience. The 4S, is it a credible smaller brother to the Turbo S? Absolutely yes. Does it deliver all of the driving pleasure of its bigger brother? Yes. Is it as comfortable and refined, Jonas?
Yeah.
That's a big yes from both of us. So ultimately, I think it comes down to a question of, can you live without that 2.8 seconds? Well, that's a tricky question. But you know what? In either case, you're going to have an awful lot of fun finding out. We're just getting wrapped up here, but there's one last thing I want to show you. Now, it's just started to snow, which means that we have snow on top of ice, which is about the worst thing you can imagine for traction in a car. But watch this. What I'm going to show you is what happens when we accelerate full and then brake. I want to show you quite how amazing the winter tires are in conjunction with the stability system. So, foot down, traction found, brake. Now you can hear the ABS working, but look. But look at that, absolutely straight, not deviating whatsoever. Just telling Jonas that maybe I should have warned him to wear his seatbelt first. We've been joined by the director of the Taycan platform, Bernd Propfer, in order to help us understand some of the technical details of the Taycan. Bernd, thank you so much for spending the time with us. The first question that I have to ask you, so the Taycan Turbo, the Turbo S, everybody has talked about these cars for a long time, but now you've gone one further and produced the 4S. Please give us a bit of an idea why. What's the thinking there of having all three cars in the lineup?
Well, basically, we're following the same strategy that we're following with all our other cars. When we put out a new model line, there's always room for a couple derivatives in terms of performance, in terms of price range also. And basically, that's what we're doing here. We started out with Turbo and Turbo S back in September, and now we're here in northern Finland introducing the new 4S.
But that actually sounds like a much simpler idea than it is, because with a lot of the other platforms, first of all, you're using technology sometimes that has been used before, you're modifying, developing, changing, so the engine transition makes a lot more of a natural sense. Here, you're almost reinventing the wheel. You're doing something completely new. So to provide three different power systems, that is really quite something significant. What I'm really hoping you can help us to understand is what is the difference between the power systems on these three different models and how is it applied?
Well, as you said, yeah, it's entirely true that we started from scratch with the Taycan project. So this is a purpose-designed vehicle that has never been, introduced to the market as an internal combustion engine vehicle, but was purposely built up and designed as a battery electric vehicle. Basically, all Taycan derivatives share the same design DNA, the same genes, the same proportions, and basically the same powertrain concept. We do have the underfloor battery, which had been introduced with 33 modules in Turbo and Turbo S. Now we have two derivatives for the 4S. The first one's using the 33 modules as well, and the second one we're reducing the module count to 28. All of the vehicles that we can see here, all four Taycan derivatives, are four-wheel drive vehicles. They all share, for example, the same two-speed transmission in the back. They share the same dimensions. They share the same trunk space, and try and modularize the powertrain concept.
Now, obviously, there's a huge amount of technical data for us to wrap our heads around. If I take off my electric car hat and I just look at this standardly as a car, we can make some adjustments in terms of how we're looking at the data to make it easy to relate to. So when we're talking about the difference between the 3 different available cars and then the 2 different battery levels, what does that mean in terms of range and in terms of power that is available to us?
Well, I'd actually like to start one step before that. We're positioning the Taycan derivatives via their performance figures. What do I mean by this? If you look at this line, the 0 to 100 figure, they're pretty neatly staffed from 2.8 seconds over 3.2 seconds for the turbo, and now the Taycan 4S with 4.0 seconds. What then in turn happens is you need to adjust the power and the torque output you need in order to achieve these performance figures. And that's basically what happened. We have incredible, the overboost power of the Taycan Turbo S is incredible, up to 560 kilowatts, then down to 500 kilowatts for the turbo. And now the new 4S has 420 for the bigger battery and 390 kilowatts for the smaller battery.
So this is one of the first things that I'm a little bit challenged by. Here we have a 4-second time for the 4S with the standard and with the performance battery. Now, the performance battery, that's going to weigh more. So how are you keeping exactly the same performance time for that with more weight on board?
Well, that actually was kind of the key challenge, if I can put it this way. As I said, we want to position the cars over the performance figures, the 0 to 100 figures in the market, and that what needs to happen with the roughly 80 kilos less in the smaller battery, we need to reduce the torque level and we need to reduce the power output in order to achieve the 4 seconds. Basically, both derivatives are, as I said, a 4-wheel drive. Nevertheless, they are differentiated roughly by 40 kilowatts in the performance.
So between the Taycan and the Panamera, say, do you have any idea from lighter to heavier what the difference is in weight?
Well, yeah, we do have 2,295 kilos, and down on the right side, the range is 2,140 kilos.
So there again, that helps us to have a pretty good understanding of what the difference is in terms of, really, I guess, my expression would be technical achievement, because if you consider how the car handles versus how you expect the car to handle with that kind of weight on board, it really is significant. Now, if by the wizardry of technology we could ask for the next slide, look at this. Autogefuehl magic. I say that, but actually it's the guys from Porsche really helping us out. So look at that. Now, I'm going to be completely honest here. This comes to the next thing that I'm not entirely clear on. This is a really important feature. This is clearly how the car is being powered. Electric motor in the front, electric motor in the back, but they are not standard throughout the whole lineup. There are differences. Fortunately, Bernd is going to be very helpful in explaining to us exactly what those differences are.
Well, at least I'm going to try, I think. Let's start at the front axle. Basically, what we did, we tried to take a modular approach. So we tried to minimize complexity in the car, and that also holds true for the electric motors and the power inverters. So what happens on the front axle is all 3 cars share the same electric motor. The numbers stand for diameter, so it's a 190 millimeter diameter of the electric motor, and the length is 160 millimeters. What then happens, we differentiate the cars in terms of their pulse inverters, the power electronics. Turbo S has the 600 amp power inverter, which basically PWR stands for Pulswechselrichter. This is a very complicated German word. It's basically the same you can see on the rear axle. Taycan Turbo and Taycan 4S share the same power electronics, which is basically half of that what Turbo S has, and is at 300 amps. If you now look at the rear axle, Taycan Turbo and Taycan Turbo S share the same electric machine. As you can see, the electric machine itself is bigger, not only diameter-wise, but also length-wise, compared to the one on the front axle. And what we then did is we simply shortened this electric motor in the 4S. So again, taking the modular approach, keeping complexity as low as possible. They are even sitting in the same housing. So if you go to Zuffenhausen, to the production facility, even our engineers can't tell the difference by just looking at the rear axle module, because both electric machines are sitting in the same housing. All 3 or 4 derivatives share the same power electronics, which is the same on the front axle for the Taycan Turbo S, and all of them have this power electronics on the rear axle. One thing that's not on the slide, all cars have the same 2-speed transmission on the rear axle, and the same non-clutch single-speed transmission on the front axle.
Thank you. I think being as straightforward as I know how to be, it took us a long time to learn the language of internal combustion engines. It's going to take a little bit of time for us to learn the technologies here, not least because they're still being developed even while we're talking about them. But hopefully this has given you a little bit of an insight as to what's happening beneath that hood and in that car. This should all become more and more familiar as we get used to the technology. But you know what? It's all a lot of technical numbers. Really, when it comes down to it, if you want to understand it, you just have to give it a drive. As the sun sets really rather rapidly here in Finland, it's time for us to reflect on what we think of the Taycan 4S. Well, I have to tell you, I'm starting to feel a bit like I'm becoming an advert for Porsche. So before you guys all get mad and write in the comments, let me explain. I've spent a very long time waiting for this car, and it absolutely blew me away when I tested the Turbo S in Luxembourg. So when Porsche said I had the chance to come and test the 4S here in Finland, I had mixed feelings. I really liked that car so very much, and I have to be honest, I just didn't know how much was going to be capable of being delivered in this cheaper package. How much cheaper? Well, if you want to go Turbo S, that's around 185,000 euro. You want to go standard turbo, it's around about 155, and you want to go for this, the 4S, you're looking at around about 105,000 euro. So that isn't nothing, but when you stack it up against the competition, it's really very reasonably priced. Well, Porsche have blown me away again. I came here fully expecting to say this car's great, but you know what, it's not the Turbo S. It's actually really, really good. When you compare at price point, I have to say, I really would have to struggle quite a lot to decide to spend that extra 85,000. Now, of course, if you are a kind of person who has to have the best, no hands down, I absolutely would say go buy the Turbo S. It's fabulous. But if that's a bit outside of your reach, then please give this a try. It's astonishing how much of that driving experience still you can get with this car. Of course, there are always a compromise to be had in any car that you go with. And the case here is the same as the Turbo S. I'm not completely in love yet with the fully digital experience. But this is the only car I can think of where I'm prepared to make that compromise. Because if it were anything other than fully digital, it just wouldn't feel quite as much like the future as it does. This has so much to say about the future of driving. And the best thing we've heard the whole time we're here is the feedback from the professional drivers who've spent their lives driving in winter landscapes in every car you can think of about just how great they think this car is. It's really hard to overstate what an amazing job Porsche's engineering team have done with this. Please don't take my word for it. Please give it a go. And before you say, come on, Brian, electric, it's not passionate, it's not emotional, try it and then tell us what you think. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. Please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope we'll see you all again soon.